They say you need to learn from your mistakes. I think it's better to learn from the mistakes of others to avoid the mistakes in the first place. That's what we're about to do. My name is Antonio Cibella. I've been a financial advisor for more than 15 years, and in that time, I've had conversations with thousands of retirees at all different stages of retirement. And you know what? A lot of the folks I talk to in their 80s and 90s have one thing in common. They have regrets, big ones. Regrets about how they spent their money, how they spent their time, and ultimately how they lived their lives. But here's the thing, these regrets aren't inevitable. In this video, I'm going to share the top 5 regrets people in their 80s and 90s often have expressed to me, and more importantly, I'll show you how to avoid these mistakes in your own future so that you don't look back with regret. Let's dive in. So let me tell you first about a client that I had. We'll call him Mark. Mark spent the better part of his life, huge amounts of time growing a business, and that business became very successful when he sold it. He sold it for tens of millions of dollars. Now, most everyone would hear that and immediately think, man, what a success that guy was. Here's what I'll tell you. When I met Mark, it was years after he had sold the business. He was sitting on a huge pile of money. He was now in his 80s, and he had very fractured relationships with nearly all of his family because for years he had prioritized the business over all else. And it worked. He became, financially at least, far more successful than almost anyone you'd ever likely meet. But that financial success came at a trade-off of most everything else in his life. The key point here, the chase for profit, for a bigger valuation, for a larger house. He lived in an absolutely astounding home, and it was one of several properties that he owned. It all came at a cost that was more than just the money that he paid for it. Now, I want to say this. What he did was not wrong, but he made a trade. He traded other resources in his life. I talk about this a lot here. Time, money, energy, and attention. Those are the resources that we all have in some form or another. How you trade those resources matter. And you need to understand those trades before you make them. Mark didn't. And even though his trade worked, he became fabulously wealthy. In hindsight, it was a bad trade for him. In the conversations I've had with folks in their late 80s, in their 90s, folks looking back on a lifetime, they never say, I wish I had worked harder. I wish I'd have gotten promoted one more time. I wish I'd had a bigger house or a fancier car, because as near as I can tell, at least, in the end, these things don't really matter. You certainly need to put away money for the future. You certainly have to have enough to live your retirement, to reach your goals. But beyond enough, the trade has diminishing returns, and the costs of more really start to add up quickly. So you've got to understand the resource trade that you're making and make sure that it's one that you want to make. Here's how you can do it. Don't just exist in the now. Don't make big decisions through the lens of how will this affect you right now. Start making those decisions through the eyes of future you, the 90-year-old version of yourself. What does that you want you to do right now? Does that mean retiring sooner? Does that mean changing your priorities? Does that mean reallocating your non-financial resources? There's a great Warren Buffett quote. There are tons of great Warren Buffett quotes, but the one that sticks out here is when he said, the big question about how people behave is whether they've got an inner scorecard or an outer scorecard. It helps if you can be satisfied with an inner scorecard. That's really good advice. That doesn't mean don't buy stuff. It doesn't mean don't have a nice house. It doesn't mean don't build a business or don't work some long hours if that's the season of life that you're in. But it means that you have to take the time to have some awareness of the balance or lack thereof in your life. Sometimes we start chasing a rabbit, the promotion, the top job, the money, and we don't stop chasing it. You don't want to wake up one day too far down the line at 80 or 90 years old and realize that you ran far from home chasing that rabbit. It might be that when you pick your head up and you look around, you realize that you don't love what you do anymore. You're still doing it because the money's great, but what's the cost? And do you need more money at this point? I say it often. Don't spend time, something that you can't get more of, to get more of something that you don't need more of, in this case money, if it's no longer a good trade to make. Now let's move on. Let's talk about what is probably your most underutilized asset. Have you ever met someone who's just burning the candle at both ends? They're constantly moving, a ball of stress. They're just not taking any time to take care of themselves. Doing this often comes at the cost of your health And that's the most ignored asset that you may have. There's a saying, a healthy man has 1,000 wishes, a sick man has only one. If you're healthy right now and you're watching this, you're very fortunate. Don't take your health for granted. This goes back to the person planning to work another year or 2 or 3 years. They've decided that they want to work until they can max out their Social Security. They want to hit a specific dollar amount in their retirement. You know, the proverbial, like, well, when I get to $2 million, I'll retire. Here's the issue with that kind of thinking. You can't just take the current situation that you're in and extrapolate it out into the future. You can't assume that it'll always be the same. We have a tendency to do this. I'm healthy now, so I could travel. Therefore, it's not a big deal if I push off traveling for a few more years while I build up my accounts just a little bit more. Let's say that you're 62 years old and you plan to retire at 67. And let's say that you're going to maintain great health until 73. And I mean like travel to Italy, hike the cities all day long kind of health. If you have the ability to retire right now, not doing so might be neglecting 5+ years of great health that could be spent checking off your bucket list instead of working. Those 5 years might represent almost 50% of the peak health years you have left. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to retire right now, but you have to be aware that time is finite. Don't just mark time and place until some arbitrary date or dollar amount. The second piece of this one, and I know this can be really difficult to fit in, but find time to stay active. Invest in your health. Don't just invest in the Roth IRA, the 401k, the HSA. Invest in you. Exercise. Treat yourself well. I've had a front row seat to the aging process of hundreds of people over the course of my career, and I can tell you there's a huge difference in the quality of life of someone at 75, 80, 90 years old based on the decisions they made years, even decades before that. Treat yourself well. It's every bit as important as maxing out those retirement accounts. Now let's move on to regret number 3. Time Magazine had an article not too long ago that said the person who will live to be 150 years old has already been born. I have no idea if they're right or wrong, but I can tell you people are living longer. A few generations ago, retirement literally didn't exist. You just worked and then you died. Nowadays, we plan for a 30-year retirement, and there are lots of folks saying we probably aren't planning long enough. I've read multiple research papers that state that we need to start planning for clients to have as long a period in retirement as they did while they were working. 40+ year retirements are a thing that are on the way. Now, that makes for quite a pickle. The whole big whopping issue with retirement is, do you have enough to retire and not run out? I used to have a coworker that would say, anyone can retire on any day. How long they can stay retired is what matters. And so if people are living much longer, we need to look at retirements of 30 years at a minimum, and maybe longer than that. What have you done to plan for that kind of longevity? Well, there's a couple of different options. First and foremost, at a minimum, you need a bucket plan that has enough future growth money, we call that bucket 3 money, to help you in those later years of retirement. You've got to plan for the long term even when you're retired. That's the bare minimum. The other route would be through guaranteeing as much of your income in retirement as possible. Now, pensions are an incredible tool for this, but very few people have access to a pension anymore. However, you can use an annuity to create lifetime income that mimics a pension, a check that will continue to show up, and even lifetime income that will grow and help you keep pace with inflation. For someone who has a large income gap, meaning when you get to retirement, you'll have a big shortfall every month. Let's say that you'll have $4,000 a month coming in from Social Security, but you need $9,000 a month to pay the bills. Getting some of that gap, that $5,000 that you're going to need every month, coming in the form of guaranteed lifetime income payments, can lighten the load on the portfolio. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics here, and don't mishear me. For all of the annuity haters, not all annuities are good. And annuities certainly aren't right for everybody. But you also can't just completely throw them out as an asset class, because for the right person in the right scenario, they can drastically reduce the risk of living too long. That's quite literally why they exist. They're a form of insurance against longevity. The takeaway here is this: plan for a long retirement, not a short one. Take into account rising inflation, rising healthcare costs, and make sure that you have a financial plan that can handle you living well into your 90s or even longer. Regret number 4. Everybody watching has no doubt heard that they need to diversify, but diversify what? Not just your investments, but also your streams of income. If you're totally reliant on a single stream of income, You've created a risk for yourself in retirement. Let me tell you another story. I had a client, I'm going to call him Joe. He was a union rep who had retired. He received a pension and Social Security, and he had been smart with his money, so he had a nice investment portfolio as well. And one day I was meeting with him and talking. We were reviewing his accounts. He was about 10 years into retirement, and his union had run into trouble and announced that they were cutting the pension benefit for folks who were already retired. Joe's phone had lit up like a Christmas tree. It was all of his former guys calling him, and a lot of them had the same story. They were completely reliant on the pension, and a 40% cut in their monthly income meant financial disaster. Now, that's a really extreme example, but it underlies the issue here. You can't rely solely on one stream of income. I don't care if it's dividends, interest from CDs, rental property income, a pension, an annuity. If you are getting enough money from a single source of retirement income that if you lost that source, you end up in catastrophe, you have a major risk sitting out there in your retirement plan. Even if the chance that that risk comes to fruition is very, very small, you should have an awareness of it, and you should try to diversify your retirement income streams if you can. This comes back again to having a proper retirement plan. A good advisor will look for things like this and help you plan accordingly. Even in this dire example, Joe was okay. It was a lot of his friends that weren't, because they hadn't taken the time to build a plan that assessed not just the likelihood of success, do I have enough money without running out, but it also assessed what could possibly go wrong. Now let's move on to the final regret. It's not managing your silent partner in retirement. This is the one people overlook most often, but it can have some of the largest financial consequences of any of these regrets. Let me paint you a picture. You retire at 62. You got a ton of guaranteed retirement income. You've got a pension like we were just talking about. So Social Security, a great pension, maybe you've got some rental property income, but you've got more than enough coming in to live the retirement you always wanted. But you've also got a nice portfolio. You did all the right things. You got a big old 401k sitting out there. Let's say that you got $1 million in the pre-tax retirement account. Now remember, you don't need this money to live on right now. So you do what you think is the smart thing. You let it sit. There's no reason to start taking money out now and paying taxes on it. You don't even need the money. And so you just let it sit there. And that seems to make common sense. And so a lot of people do this. I can't count how many times I've seen it. But sometimes common sense isn't the right move. Think of it this way. For years, this has been future money. Money that you don't need right now. And even though you're retired, you still don't need it. So why would you take it out? And so you let it sit. You let it remain future money. If you're 62 years old, and you're watching this video right now, that means that you were born in 1963. That means that for you, your required minimum distribution starting age will be 75. This is where the problem comes in. Let's say that you let your $1 million just sit until the RMDs kick in because you didn't need it and you didn't want to start to pay taxes on the money. When you actually get to that first RMD at 75, assuming you've had a 7% annual growth rate, your $1 million has grown into $2,477,762. The first RMD you have is going to equal $100,723, over $100,000. And if your assets continue to earn similar returns, that number is going to go up every year. If you ever wanted to blow up a tax return, start piling another $100,000 a year in income on top of it. This is what happens by doing what you thought was the smart thing, by continuing to save the money for the future because you didn't need it right now. This is not managing your silent partner. You see, if you have any pre-tax money in your retirement plan, 401ks, traditional IRAs, 403bs, any money that is to be taxed in the future, you don't actually own all of that account. You have a silent partner, your Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam loves it when your account balances grow because that means his slice of the pie grows as well. Now, I'm a firm believer in the old saying, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. We're not trying to evade paying taxes here, but you certainly have to manage the amount of taxes you're paying by creating a tax plan, and a tax plan geared toward lifetime tax liability. This is another change from what you've likely been doing for years. For years and years, you've been trying to minimize your tax bill that year. You get your return, you talk to the accountant, what can we do to get this number lower? And often that results in some version of kicking the can down the road. The result of all of that kicking is loads of people that I talk to who are sitting on retirement tax bombs, and we have to change their thinking. We have to help them craft a plan, not to minimize taxes this very second, but to minimize the amount of tax that they'll pay over their lifetime. That's done a number of different ways. It's its own video, if not its own series of videos, so I'm not going to get into the specifics today. But suffice it to say that your advisor should be working with you and coordinating with your CPA to come up with a proper tax plan as you approach retirement, because you might be sitting on one of these big tax bombs yourself. Now, they say you have to learn from your mistakes. I would challenge that it's better to learn from the mistakes of others so you can avoid the mistake in the first place. Hopefully this video helps you review your own situation to see if you're on the path to any of these regrets. While you're on the path of examining your financial future, let's talk about some retirement rules that are all wrong. We'll do that in this video right over here.